We have an epidemic in the Coachella Valley, and it's not coronavirus. It's Chem Sex. And if you haven't heard that term, get used to hearing it. And we have an epidemic in the Coachella Valley, and it's not coronavirus. It's Chem Sex. And if you haven't heard that term, get used to hearing it. And we've got someone in the studio right now who is intimately familiar with the process of how this addiction occurs and how we can begin as a community to unravel, one person by person, this tragedy. And we're talking to Terry Gatewood, who's the founder of Blue Tiger Recovery. And I'm looking forward so much to your coming in the studio, so we're grateful to have you. Thank you for being here
Oh,
today.
thank you so much for having me in.
What is Chem Sex?
Chem Sex is generally associated with methamphetamine. We call it drug-driven sex. Oftentimes, whether it could be cocaine, could be ecstasy, GHB, but primarily when people are talking Chem Sex, they're talking about meth.
And that's, what impact has it had on the gay community?
You know, I have to say, I've been sober from meth sex myself, coming up on 15 years next month. And I honestly believe our community more going to be dying from meth addiction than HIV.
Oh.
I truly believe that this is becoming such an epidemic. And we saw a spike and then it seemed to be going down, and now it's spiked back up and now. And especially here in the Palm Springs area, you know, we mentioned earlier that here, older guys that have never tried meth before, and they feel like, you know, they need to do that to either be a good host, you know, for younger guys, and they're actually using it as a sense of currency. So they may not be paying for the sex, and they're starting to use it for the first time. So we're seeing a wide range. It's not just the party drug. It's not just a club drug. In fact, meth is very isolating. So unlike, say, ecstasy, that may kind of create false oxytocin, which kind of has this lovey-dovey, you know, kind of feeling, meth can be very isolating. And when people don't really engage going out and interacting. So the Chem Sex, in that term, is really popular in Europe, especially, and there's levels of how people use meth. And so, and usually for the Chem Sex, that's what IV drug use, or referred to as slamming. And there's webcam groups that literally, you know, you can have sex on webcam, you can use drugs on webcam, you can do both.
They're the whole big chat rooms full of people that they sit, each with their individual camera, doing whatever they're doing, including using the drugs. And it's not porn exactly, but it's sort of escapist all the same.
Right, and you know, just it's interesting, you know, because in a way these guys are so isolated. They're in their room, they're, you know, in front of their monitor, but they feel like, you know, they're part of another community. But the interesting with the way meth works in the brain is it increases the level of dopamine so high that naturally sex is the mechanism that you get the most dopamine. I mean, because from an evolutionary standpoint, you know, your body, our genes, it's like, hey, go reproduce and have sex. That's a great thing. Feel good. So we're going to give you, it's like big reward for that. Food is another one that you get a big reward for that. So when you use meth and your brain is so filled with dopamine, your body is like, and your brain is like, wow, I must be really sexual, because usually, I mean, this much dopamine, it's got to be sex. And, you know, and interesting too, we characterize meth users sometimes when we're talking about their behavior and what do they do when they're on the drug. For us at Blue Tiger, we deal with, you know, the meth sex guys There are those that we call project tweakers. Project tweaker, if you're going to go hook up with somebody and you walk in the door and you smell chocolate chip cookies, it is not a good sign. And if, oh no, it's like, oh no, you're a project tweaker.
Project tweaker. All the electronics in the house disassembled.
Oh, exactly. Yes. And they've been remodeling the bathroom for
the last
3
10
years.
years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so those guys, it's interesting to have, maybe a more OCD angle for their meth use. But for the sex guys, we get a lot of too that saying, if I just stop the meth, I'll stop this behavior.
But it's so tough to do that. I want to talk more about this. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking to Terry Gatewood from Blue Tiger Recovery. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back right after this. KK 106.5, the Pride of the Valley. KK 106.5, the Pride of the Valley. It's Ben and Laura Ann, and we are delighted to have with us right now Terry Gatewood, the founder and clinical director of Blue Tiger Recovery. Before we pause, we were talking about the fusion of sex and drugs, and particularly crystal meth.
Right.
And you were beginning to explain to us how these two things interact and how it can be lethal for people in the gay community, anybody, but it's hitting us so hard. Why do these two combine so well or so badly?
Well, again, with the level of dopamine, which is the granddaddy of all reward neurotransmitters. Mm-hmm. So it's very powerful. It's very addictive. I mean, we get little hits of dopamine. You walk out, you see the mountains, you see a beautiful sunset, mm-hmm. you get a hug from grandma, you get a little hits of dopamine because, our body wants us to be happy, mm-hmm. And because it doesn't want us to get depressed and kill ourselves. So giving us dopamine to remain happy is great. The thing, that we were referring to earlier too was guys think that, if I just go in for standard substance abuse treatment mm-hmm. and I just stop the meth, all this other stuff will go away. Well, what we find, we ask them basically two questions. Are you using meth because you love drugs so much that you're going to take a drug that allows you to do it for 3 to 5 days mm-hmm. and with multiple partners? Or do you have some inhibitions, some shame, some stigma about the sex that you like? And that when you do meth, all that goes away. Mm-hmm. Whether you're HIV positive and you don't want to have the talk. It seems like now with PrEP and very few people are talking these days about STDs, STIs. And so
that conversation has disappeared.
It has.
And else, I don't want to interrupt you, but what else is making this more challenging is the prevalence of the apps, the phone apps for hookups, the Grindr and the Scruff and the other ones, which make it so instantly available, which it can lead to great human connections, but it generally doesn't. It leads you down a different road.
Oh, and absolutely. The apps are a whole nother issue that's in itself about when you go to a bar, there's the capacity in that room. Let's mm-hmm. say it's 70. Well, there are only so many opportunities there for rejection. Yeah. If you go online, there are thousands of people online that are either woofing you or tapping you or whatever they do, and so all those opportunities. So if you're not well equipped to deal with rejection, yes, there are more opportunities to score. Yeah. But for those guys, also a lot of guys say, well, I don't have a drug dealer, so I must not have a problem. I'm like, oh, well, that's because, there are several websites, especially, that are known for drug-driven sex. Yeah. And so you put in you look for certain codes, certain initials, certain words, and you're like, oh, okay, they party. Yeah. P&P is probably one of the most classic party and play. Mm-hmm. There are other derivatives for meth itself. So you go on there, if you go on some of the, let's say, some of the rent sites, whether, mm-hmm. Rent Boy, Rent Men, whatever. I usually don't give out web addresses, but, so now I can see them running to their laptops right now. But I was like, and oftentimes they'll put into their profiles, mm-hmm. They may not have a drug dealer, but they know where to go and to get it.
And it's not exactly like finding a speakeasy in the 20s. It's much simpler and much more straightforward than that. Listen, we need to pause for a moment. If you'll stick around, you've got something coming up through Blue Tiger Recovery a survey that I want people to know about that they can take. Will you stick with us just a minute?
Oh, right on. My pleasure.
KGate 106.5, the pride of the Valley. It's Ben and Laura Ann having a very important conversation, something that directly impacts our community, and that is the marriage, the unholy marriage of meth and sex, and the way it's devastating, and the way to treat it is, it's not simply the approach of dealing with chemical addiction. Laura Ann, you had a question.
I did. Well, I actually wanted to point out that your anniversary is coming up, your birthday of being sober from this. It's going on 15 years.
Right.
And if you could tell people a little bit about when you got off of it and what you went through and your hardship, but the light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, sure. Thanks for asking. So when I got sober 15 years ago, I came out from Oklahoma to LA, and I had never had in my memory sober sex. You know, since I came out as being gay, I've been HIV positive since I was 23. So in '87, you know, that was a really dark time to be HIV positive. So of course there were a lot of drugs or alcohol just to kind of navigate through all of that. And so when I got sober, because the reason why I got sober is because one night after having a daily smoking habit, I got to the point where I couldn't quit. The depressions were getting stronger and stronger. I couldn't get high enough to get out of them. And so I was in my kitchen, I had a knife to my wrist, and I was like, and my partner was there, and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I can't stop. I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. I've got to end it. And he was like, isn't there somebody you could call? And I'm like, call? What are you talking about calling? I had no clue about recovery. I mean, you know, it was just not in my...
It was just so dark for you. You were like, I'm done. I got to end this. There's no out.
There's no out. And which I have to say, thankfully, I have that experience. Because for me, that is a healthy fear that I still, to this day, I feel like if I were to relapse on meth, I would go right back to wanting to kill myself. So to me, meth equals death, literally. And so luckily, you know, I've had scary situations where, you know, you go hook up with somebody, you're like, oh, this is going to be great, this is going to be fun. They said they don't party, and they pull.
Out comes the pipe.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, dude, you said you didn't do that, you know, and I like freak out because you're in that moment and you're like, wow, I really want this experience. You know, sex is so amazing. Sex is great. We are very sex positive at Blue Tiger Recovery. And that, in fact, that's what we want to help guys, and we're actually seeing a lot more women who are sex addicts and also getting into meth as well, to be able to regain healthy sexuality, which I kind of hate that term. It doesn't sound too hot.
No, I love it. It's beautiful.
But, you know, as far as like, I like hot, affirming, fun sex, you know, it's great. But, you know, so for me, when I did that, and it was just like no turning back. Now, as I mentioned, I tried to stop on my own however many times, and I couldn't. So do I think that relapse is part of my story? Absolutely. I mean, there were plenty of times I tried to stop and I couldn't. And so, I mean, from that moment, I haven't used or picked up, but it's like, I have a really strong feeling about when guys do relapse and people are condescending or judging.
Which happens.
It happens. You know, you walk into many meetings and so forth, and people are condescending. And I said, you know,
oh, that queen just came back in.
Come here, honey, sit by me. Oh, well, what'd you learn this time? Yeah. And I'm like, you know what, folks, we don't shoot our wounded.
No.
You know, it's like we love them. We are compassionate because, frankly, shaming them is only going to make them stay in that cycle. We feel at Blue Tiger, we look to reduce the shame. So if you're using meth because you have some stigma about the sex you like, or shame about it, or inhibition, let's look at that and see, it's like, okay, if we can remove the shame or the inhibitions, then the need to using meth is gone.
Now, if someone wants to take this step and wants to do so beneath your roof, they go to bluetigerrecovery.com to find out more information, yes?
You bet. And if they're here local, they can call it 760-534-3487.
Very good. And you, before we go, you have a survey that's posted. It's on your website.
You're right. It's if you have an idea or you're wondering if you may be a sex addict, go to bluetigerrecovery.com/SAST. bluetigerrecovery.com/SAST. Correct.
Answer some questions, find out if you fit your profile. What does it feel like for you?
Right, exactly. And then give us a call. We're happy to go over that with you. Come in. We offer outpatient, IOP, individual outpatient, or intensive outpatient, and partial hospitalization programs and sober living.
Terry Gatewood, founder and director of Blue Tiger Recovery. Thank you wholeheartedly for being here today and for sharing with your honesty. And let me invite you to come back soon, because this is
I'd
an
love to.
important issue that we've got to talk about.
Thanks for all the help you do out there.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
KG 106.5, the pride of the